Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 27th of October 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your hosts this afternoon are Mike Robinson and Brian Gerrish. Well, we're also joined today by Mark Anderson from American Free Press, and of course Mark also runs the Truthhound blogspot. And we've also got Dr. Graham Downing joining us, and we're going to cover in that section, we're going to be taking a look at AI and the march towards robotics. But let's have a look at Syria. Of course, Syria now completely forgotten by the BBC. It's not newsworthy. There's not enough deaths. But there are some other important events happening.
The regime change continues. The pressure for regime change continues. Now, of course, with the Russian veto the other day, as we reported, the OPCW and the Joint Investigation Mission has ended on the 1st of October formally. But they have produced a report which has gone to the Security Council. And the OPCW investigators say that they're confident, Brian, confident, not certain, it's not guaranteed, they're just confident that Damascus was to blame for the sarin attack in Syria in April. They said that they're confident that the Syrian Arab Republic is responsible for the release of sarin at Khan Sheikhoun. They say that it was delivered via an aerial bomb that was dropped by an airplane, apparently. So that's good. Russia, well, what did they have to say about this? We'll just put the actual report on screen. There you go. Russia's foreign minister has said that Moscow is going to suggest to the Security Council measures which might improve methods for probing or investigating chemical attacks in the future, because the methodology that was used in this was complete nonsense, they believe. I believe that's the case as well, having read most of this. They said that the conclusions that were brought all came from the same evidence and testimony, which caused the Russians great doubt due to the bias of sources and due to non-compliance with the requirements of the Convention on the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, according to the sequence of collection and storage of material evidence. And as we pointed out, all the way through this process, of course, there has been no proper procedure with regard to the collection and storage of material evidence. The Russians also said that all these logical inconsistencies, internal contradictions, are visible even after the first cursory reading. I think I have to agree with that. What did Boris Johnson have to say? Well, he said the independent report from expert investigators reaches a clear conclusion. The Assad regime used sarin nerve gas against the people of Khan Sheikhoun in Syria on the 4th of April, with tragic consequences for hundreds of victims. He didn't say anything about the terrorists that the Foreign Office and the Department for International Development have been funding over the years, and the tragic consequences that that funding has had for thousands of victims in Syria.
This is true, but the investigation has reached a clear conclusion. They're confident and they've reached a clear conclusion.
They're very confident.
Where is the evidence?
There isn't any.
Right. So this is where we were about 4 years ago with Brooks Newmark, where we asked Brooks Newmark, Conservative MP, where the evidence was, and he said, well, it's been reported in the press, and every single source he mentioned, of course, did not give any evidence.
Absolutely. Now, I just wanted to highlight this absolutely obscene piece of propaganda from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. For anybody that's watching this on video, it is spectacular, including the music, which you may be able to just catch over my voice here. Despite committing to dismantling their chemical weapons program, there have been consistent reports of attacks by the Syrian regime, apparently.
That's hearsay.
Absolutely. The Security Council set up an independent body which didn't follow the normal procedures, but they don't mention that. And so it goes on. It is an incredible piece of propaganda. Even the BBC would be embarrassed to push this out.
I was going to say proud of it, Mike. Depends how you look at it. So all of this is created by the British government on the basis of no evidence at all.
Absolutely.
Right.
You love the music?
Perhaps the Russians produced this for the Foreign and Commonwealth Office.
I don't know. But, you know, the main problem for the Foreign Office and for Boris Johnson is that many people are, raising these questions and asking them to account for themselves. Basically, we can't have that anymore. So, of course, we've got to shut down some of the free speech on the internet. And, well, Google has decided that the best way to do that is to build trust online by partnering with the International Fact-Checking Network. So here we go. Google has partnered with an organization which, if you find out anything about it, is funded by who, do you think?
Well, a name, Soros?
Yeah, well, absolutely. So this is Erica Anderson, who's partnerships manager at Google, who's pushed out this press release. And it says, with so much information available around the clock and across devices, the ability to quickly understand what's true and what's false online is increasingly important. That's why a year ago we introduced a new feature called the Fact Check Tag as a way of to show people when a news publisher or fact check organization has verified or debunked a claim, statistic or statement. Today, we're announcing a new partnership with the International Fact Checking Network at the Poynter Institute as a non-partisan organization. Well, the word non-partisan there depends very much what you think of George Soros. As a non-partisan organization, IFCN is committed to promoting excellence in fact-checking by building a community of fact-checkers around the world. IFCN has developed a widely accepted code of principles for fact-checked organizations. Signatories range from Associated Press to the Washington Post, PolyFact and factcheck.org. And so it goes on. Now, of course, as we've said, IFCN, part of the Poynter Institute, funded absolutely by the Open Society Foundation. So, Brian, now we get to see what perhaps George Soros is intending to do with this $18 billion.
$18 billion. And, of course, we've already seen that this so-called fact-checking has been organised in a pan-European basis. So we had a headquarters in France tied in with Google. The BBC was involved at that. And now, of course, we're seeing who's really driving it, which is George Soros. And I have to say, let's not forget that the BBC's fact-checking organisation, BBC Reality Check, is very happy for all facts to be checked. But the facts you're not allowed to check are who actually wrote the BBC's fact-checking articles, because that would be unfair, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's ask Mark Anderson for comment. What's your initial response to finding out that Google and a Soros-funded organisation are working together in order to check your facts?
Well, the biggest thing that comes to mind is, of course, it can be a very subjective thing to say what's a fact and what's not. If you're going to fact-check someone's opinion, then it's almost as if you're saying they're not entitled to their opinion. Now, if you're checking statistics or data, then it's a question of where your data comes from. Who's to say which data is accurate? The biggest thing with the press and Google and all these organizations and the Soros money behind it just makes it more troubling and more menacing is that, you know, whose facts are we talking about, and how do we ascertain who's right and who's wrong in so many of these arguments? And above all, the worst thing is the people that are saying that they are the fact checkers, they are automatically implying the premise that they are in possession of the facts, and it's only a matter of deciding who is running askew or getting off base in terms of comparing themselves to these fact checkers. So they're saying we are the we're the priests of truth. We above all know what's factual and what is not, and you've just got to measure up. And anybody that doesn't measure up to us is an idiot. You're stupid. You don't know what you're talking about. So the arrogance is sky high here.
Absolutely. Well, it gets better because Twitter has announced today that it is now stopping RT and Sputnik for advertising on the Twitter network. So no more RT advertisements or Sputnik advertisements. That's effective immediately. The decision, they say, was based on the retrospective work that they've been doing around the 2016 US election. Sorry, I need, oh dear, it's just terrible. And the US intelligence community's conclusion that both RT and Sputnik attempted to interfere with the election on behalf of the Russian government. We did not come to this decision lightly, they say, and we're taking this step now as part of their ongoing commitment to help protect the integrity of user experience on Twitter. Now, just one more thing before you comment, Brian. They've also decided to take the $1.9 million that they were projected to have earned from RT global advertising since they became an advertiser in 2011, which includes the $274,100 in 2016 US-based advertising that we highlighted in our September 28th blog post, and donate those funds to supporting external research into the use of Twitter in civil engagement and elections, including use of malicious automation and misinformation, with the initial focus on elections and automation. We will have more details to share on that disbursement soon. So not only are they stopping RT and Sputnik from advertising, but they're actually going to use the money that they raised from previous advertising to fund civic engagement and investigate, think tank.
Yeah, but this is all cuddly teddy bear propaganda, isn't it? We're such nice people because we're going to use this money to do the right thing. My question is, have they produced the facts, the factual evidence to support the accusation they're making? They're saying the Russians interfered. Have they produced the facts and the evidence themselves?
No.
No. Okay.
No. Okay. Moving on quickly. The National Audit Office today has published a report into the WannaCry cyber attack, which took down the National Health Service, if you remember. And what they're saying is the WannaCry cyber attack had potentially serious implications for the NHS and its ability to provide care to patients. It was a relatively unsophisticated attack and could have been prevented by the NHS following basic IT security best practice. There are more sophisticated cyber threats out there than WannaCry, so the department and the NHS need to get their act together to ensure that the NHS is better protected against future attacks. They say that the attack led to a disruption of at least 34% of NHS trusts in England, although the Department of Health and the NHS England do not know the full extent of the disruption. I find that spectacular. Thousands of appointments and operations were cancelled, and in 5 areas patients had to travel further to accident emergency departments. The Department of Health, the NHS England and the National Crime Agency told the National Audit Office that no NHS organisation paid the ransom, but the department does not know how much the disruption cost. Right. It's just spectacular. The cyber attack could have caused more disruption if it had not been stopped by a cyber researcher activating a kill switch so that WannaCry stopped locking devices. We'll come back onto that in a second. This is Ben Wallace MP, and this was his response because he works for the Home Office, as you know. It was North Korea dummies. That's what he said.
I think North Korea is a pretty impressive place because it's a relatively small country. It can produce missiles that we can't produce. We're having trouble equipping our armed forces at the moment. And while they're building these missiles, they can actually hack into all of the Western IT systems. Well, we are led to believe this is complete nonsense.
So absolutely, this is complete nonsense. Here's why it's complete nonsense. Because the Hacker News today pushing out that the next generation ransomware, Bad Rabbit as it's called, is using leaked external romance NSA exploit to spread. So in other words, if you remember, there were leaks to WikiLeaks of NSA and CIA hacking exploits. And then what's happened is that WannaCry and this new one, Bad Rabbit, have been built based on those that code produced by the NSA. But let's go back to this point that the cyber attack would have caused much more disruption to the NHS if it had not been stopped by a cyber researcher activating a kill switch. Because, is there any sort of anecdotal, perhaps isn't the right word, but any sort of suggestion that the NSA perhaps is behind this stuff? Well, just remember that the guy who developed the kill switch that stopped this thing in the first place was arrested by the NSA. That's Marcus Hutchins. Was arrested by the FBI because the NSA claimed that he had hacked their systems while he was in the United States at a hacking conference. He was arrested several months ago. He's now been released on certain bail conditions, which initially involved a GPS tag. But now he's no longer under a curfew. He's no longer under GPS monitoring. He's not allowed to leave the United States. But this is the guy that saved the NHS, and the British government is doing nothing to help. He is looking at a lifetime in prison for an allegation in a similar way that Gary McKinnon was. But unfortunately, he didn't realise that he had committed any offence in the United States, so he actually went to the United States in the summer and ended up getting picked up. So was he picked up because he committed a crime, or was he picked up because he committed the crime of stopping the NSA's cyber attack, which I have no evidence to suggest either way. That's just purely my speculation, but I just want to ask that question.
Perhaps we might bring Graham Downing in here. I can see that you're looking puzzled there. This is Alice in Wonderland stuff, isn't it? Somebody has put in our chat room. Next thing that's going to be announced is a Ministry for Truth, and I think we're not far off it.
Well, I was kind of reeling when you said, I misheard you. You said fact-checking tag. I thought you said fact-checking hag. And I had this vision of this horrendous woman running the global Ministry of Truth, telling us all how to behave. The thing is that I work in science and literature a lot, and I'm an expert witness, so I have to deal with facts, and I'm called to account on those facts at the highest level in the court. So I can actually tell you that just look at science, for example. Most of it, even the randomized controlled trials, 90% are just not worth the paper they're written on. And even the two retiring journals, editors of the leading medical journals in the world, both said that these things are mostly biased and not worth the paper they're written on. So that's at that level where science is absolutely seen as the very highest level of this, of fact or fact checking, if you like, to use that term. So if they can't get it right and it's biased, then God help anybody else around the world.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, if anybody's any doubt as to what the British government's policy is for people that the British government deems to be a terrorist, then we're going to give it to you now. It's very simple. Kill them all.
Yeah.
And the beauty about this, of course, is it's kill them all without any form of trial.
Yes.
Because that might get in the way. It might produce facts, Mike. So here we are. This is the UK column announcement on the 27th of October. That it's now official that the British government policy is literally kill them all. We needn't bother with trials because they're very inconvenient trials, especially when facts come up. Well, where's this come from? Well, the words have come out of the mouth of Sir Michael Fallon in the first place, but the man who's followed, the man who's actually started this little trail off is Rory Stewart, who's now an international development minister.
That's Florence of Arabia that we're talking about?
Yeah, we're coming on to that, Mike. Okay. At the weekend, young Rory said that the only way to deal with militants in almost every case is to kill them. So he doesn't even believe that they've got to be terrorists.
Right.
If you happen to be a bit militant, he thinks you should be killed. Now, you'll note that I took a little look on Rory Stewart's Twitter page here, but up came the warning, which is on the bottom of your screen, blocked.
Yes.
So I'm blocked, presume other people are blocked as well. But if you're militant, he thinks you should be killed, and that is without trial. Just remember, this is what Mike was referring to, that Rory Stewart is known in Westminster as Florence of Arabia. You can decide what that's about, but here he is in the garb of Cumbrian Afghanistani dress. He's there.
Yes.
Okay. Now, what I wanted to remind people is that this man was former chair of the Defence Select Committee, but he got pushed off that pretty quickly. I think I can imagine why. But when we asked about his connections into the Bilderbergers, he didn't want to talk about it. Just look at this man's track record. Bilderberger Trilateral Commission, EU Council on Foreign Relations, Turquoise Mountain. I'll leave you viewers and listeners to look at that themselves. But of course, this man was a teacher for the British royal family. So very, very dangerous man, in my opinion. And he thinks if you're militant, and who decides what militant means? The British government. But if you're deemed to be militant, he thinks you should be killed without trial.
Well, Mark, speaking of Bilderbergers and trilaterals and whatnot, let's just briefly go back to the Council on the Chicago Global Affairs Council, and you wanted to highlight the America First aspect to a recent discussion there.
Yes, I covered that recently. It was America First and the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, which is basically the Chicago Windy City version of Chatham House. It used to be the Chicago Council on Foreign Relations, like the New York hub, but they changed that name because it got a little uncomfortable for them. They had this America First survey, and I'm just going by memory. I'm not reading the article right now, but the survey, ironically and surprisingly not, happened to show that the outcome of the survey was, lo and behold, exactly or pretty much exactly what the Chicago Council wanted to see. They're saying that after 6 or 7 months of the Trump presidency, that the strong America First sentiments that were there in January and February are now eroding away. And suddenly, less and less Trumpians, Trump supporters, support an America First philosophy, and more of them want global engagement, free trade, interventionism, including military interventionism. And so it seems that the Chicago Council, although I won't say that its survey is absolutely inaccurate, but they're so biased, they're so hardwired to see what they only want to see, and that is to have a pro-interventionist president, a pro-interventionist government, including the Congress. They're so biased and weighted toward that I don't think they would admit it if it went the other way in the first place. So they're trying to mitigate against the populist sentiment that expressed itself through Brexit, even though that's been sabotaged largely, and expressed itself through the Trump triumph last November when he won the presidency. So that these studies are meant to kind of downplay that, to dampen that sentiment, to erode the populist revolt, and to influence the media in such a way where they can say that, there's no lurch to the right. There's really no major populist revolt here. Whatever was there is eroding away. And people can go to thetruthhound.com, one of my blogs, that's thetruthhound.com, to read the details. But the one-worlders are very worried about the sentiment behind Brexit, even though that's been largely steered off course, and the sentiment behind the Trump campaign, even though Trump may not be the perfect president. They're worried about the populist revolt that's behind those things, and they're trying to dampen them down. And this report details that, and they were pretty uncomfortable when I went there and tried to ask some questions. They actually cut me off. They wouldn't even let me speak.
Look, Mark, that sentiment seems to be echoed, or was echoed on Monday this week, because Chatham House was holding its London conference. Here is the first plenary session 1, America First, America Alone, the End of World Order, ? Is how they entitled it. They said the panel discussed whether under President Trump the US appears to be withdrawing from its historical role as an underwriter of the post-war liberal consensus in favour of defining the world as one where the US must and will compete against others, including allies, for national advantage. It was argued that President Trump is often seen as a catalyst for change, but in reality he is in fact a reflection of what's happening economically, that there's a growing sense that the US is finished with paying for the security of the global community and now seen as a burden. However, the jury is still out on whether US power abroad is actually in decline, and it was noted that the long history of American might is not easy to replicate. No one, not even Russia or China, is ready to step into those shoes just because there may be a vacancy. It was noted that any absence of world leadership is worrying, and acting solely on your own national interest to the exclusion of others does not bring the cooperation that is needed. And so it goes on. So increasing hysteria and concern amongst the globalists that this is the way that it's going to go.
Yeah, one interesting thing, Mike, is Michael Desch, a Notre Dame professor, the university is only about 30 miles from where I'm sitting here. He pointed out that Trump is more of a Jacksonian. In other words, he would pick and choose his interventionist or engagement policies, including military ones. He wouldn't absolutely pull back from the world like they're so worried about. And it's actually true. Trump did send naval ships around or near Korea when they fired off all these missiles that they can amazingly create while Britain can't do it. And Trump has saber rattled at Iran, saying he doesn't like the Iran nuclear deal to prevent them from building even one nuclear weapon, while the U.S. monopolizes practically the nuclear weapons market. So Trump actually is not a America Firster in the Charles Lindbergh sense of the word, or the Senator Bob Taft sense of the word. He is an interventionist, but in this Jacksonian model, he's a more picky or choosy interventionist, as this Notre Dame professor saw it at the Chicago program. So number one, it's not absolutely true that Trump is an America Firster in the tradition of that sense. And number two, when America was founded, they said, trade with all possible nations, but entangling alliances with none. Now, to avoid entangling alliances doesn't necessarily mean you're going to completely pull back from the world and build walls around you and put alligators in the moat and seal yourself off in some hermetically sealed bunker. This is what these one-worlders are always implying, that the U.S., if we even talk about America first, that suddenly we're going to crawl down some hole somewhere, which is total hyperbole and absolutely false. So a non-interventionist foreign policy, according to Thomas Jefferson or George Washington, was not to have entangling alliances, such as the U.S. does with Israel, where we have to fight a lot of their battles and bail out and support their military, and that's deleterious and corrosive to our economic situation here. That's an example of an entangling alliance that is not helping the United States. But there's a lot of misstatements going on here by these one-worlders. Donald Trump is not a dyed-in-the-wool America firster to begin with internationally. Now, domestically, he's a little bit more that way. We need to see if he's really honest about pulling out of the climate deal, the Paris Accord. We need to see if he's really honest about staying out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. What's he going to do with TTIP? The jury's still out a lot when it comes to Trump, foreign policy and domestic policy. He does lean toward America first, it's true, but it's not absolutely borne out that that's where he's coming from. So there's still things to sort out. We need accuracy. We need fact checking. Oops, there goes that word.
Okay.
You know.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Well, our regular viewers and listeners may well have noticed that we haven't got David Scott with us today. And I wanted to say that David actually has been doing some brilliant work in the background. He couldn't be with us today because he's back up helping the fight in Ardeshir against Scottish Water. But the other thing that took place yesterday was the launch of the Scottish Fresh Start Foundation. This is a movement of, I'm going to say, ordinary people. It's of child abuse survivors who've said clearly Scotland is not going to fully investigate what's happened to the children. The inquiries are farce. We are going to do it ourselves. So that was part of the panel. Now, the panel is not the people who've created it, because there's many people behind the scenes working extremely hard. I've just put a couple of the faces on. David Scott on the left, Wilfred Wong there next to him, and also we've got Robert Green. But this is teamwork by a large number of people. And what are they going to do? Well, they're going to do this. They're going to run mobile conferences around Scotland. They're going to collect abuse survivor evidence, including that from satanic ritual abuse. And they are going to then convene common law juries to have a look at that evidence. And if there is a case to answer, if those juries deem there is a case to answer, then that information is going to be put to the Crown Prosecution Service north of the border, with the caveat that if the Crown Prosecution Service fails to act, then common law prosecution of any individual failing to act is going to occur. We already know this has put huge pressure on the Scottish establishment. This is ordinary people taking back control, bringing common law into action. I think it's immensely powerful. And I'll just bring this up, that having been told what was happening, the launch and the details of what's going on here, how many Scottish press and media people attended the Fresh Start Foundation launch? Well, the answer was none, not a single one. Obviously, there's no conspiracy to cover up child abuse in Scotland.
No, I'm just going to go to there.
Okay.
Brian.
Well, let's come in at what's happening with young people. Elderly people. Young people, we know, that's a massive industry. We produced the figure a couple of days ago of £19 billion of what children's worth to the British government. Elderly people worth a fortune to the drug companies while they're alive. But the problem is staff, and the solution, according to this article, was robots. I'll do this very quickly because we covered it. So they're trialling robots in care homes. And not to worry, because these robots are going to be able to go around and see whether people look happy. And something I found frightening was this very childish response from a chief social worker, Lynn Romeo from Southend Social Services. She was enchanted by Pepper and she thinks there's real opportunities for him to support and enhance engagement.
And Pepper was the robot.
Pepper's the robot. And then if you ask Pepper how much he costs, he'll tell you that money's not everything. It's all about love. So this Japanese company is producing this robot for love. They're not charging at all. Well, they are, of course. So at that point, let's bring in Dr. Graham Downing. And Graham, I know that you have been talking out Ian Crane's AV 8.1 event recently, warning people about what's coming in the field of AI. And I'll just bring this first slide on and then we'll open up with you. This is New York Times, breakthroughs in data processing and conversation systems are helping more and more companies to implement AI in their operations. This is all good news, isn't it?
Well, this is a huge subject. I mean, I've done 2 talks now, one at AV8 and one at AV 8.1, and I urge your listeners and viewers to get them from you guys or from Ian R. Crane's site, because I really lay out, a lot to do with this subject. There's a lot of science behind this, and there's a lot of the problems you're seeing in the world that are related to this. I don't think it's good for several reasons. I mean, one of the things that, just to touch on here with the NHS, is that they are absolutely bringing in artificial intelligence, not just in robots, but also in how they manage their data and how they diagnose. They want to bring in technology that replaces doctors so they can get more accurate, quote unquote, diagnosis, that they reckon computers can do it better. And of course, in America, you've got surgery being produced by robotic arms. That's many years. Now, there's many cases against that. They're suing the manufacturers of those machines because there's been error and people have died using them. And there's people pro and for that on either side. So there's many issues. Keeping it just towards the NHS, there's also other problems, because when you bring in this artificial intelligence, what they're saying is you need to release all the anonymized political data. And that's a direct quote from an article talking about mentioning the director of the NHS. So they're talking about accessing all your data, and it's written political in it as well, which is very interesting. And the question is, do we want all this information being given out to all these people? Do we want them controlling us and linking our health to what our beliefs are or what our lifestyle is? And this is yet another aspect of it as well. And I think you may have up in screen. Is that Professor Lieber you've got?
That's Professor Lieber. It says in 2011, Lieber was recognized by Thomson Reuters as a leading chemist in the world based on the impact of his scientific publications. And there's a quote there which says, personal computing will become very, very personal. Currently, our interface is through the peripheral nervous system, input by touch and voice, output to eyes and ears. In a very personal future, we work directly from our brains, integrating 3D nanoelectronics with our neural networks. We will have already created the blueprint for innervated or cyborg tissue, and recently shown how electronics can be injected into and intermingled with the brain to modify Descartes' cogito ergo sum. My future of computing is I think, therefore it happens.
Yeah, so there's different aspects to artificial intelligence. And there's different aspects to transhumanism, which is what you're talking about there. Some people perceive that it's many years away. And some people perceive that, oh, you don't have to worry about it, it's never going to happen. They haven't really developed the computer power to give us all these problems. And that's not necessarily correct, because one of their goals is to upload our consciousness, our minds into these machines. I mean, sounds crazy, but that's actually one of the goals. We're not there yet, although they are alluding to, they do have an idea that they can do that a lot quicker than what we may have thought. However, where we are at the moment is we are definitely at a place where they can literally plug you into the internet, which is, just to give you a very simple way of understanding that. And what that scientist there is describing now. Yeah, and if you want to lead on with that mind reading rats there.
There you go.
Yeah, well, this is really what the experiment is. It's not just literally, what they do is they inject a mesh which interfaces in between your skull and your brain. And what it does is it's used to connect you to the internet. Okay, they've done the experiments on it. It's tolerated very well. And this rats was some of the early experiments on it. And what they did was they connected these rats via they were separated by thousands of miles. And what they found was they could connect them to work as one, and they call it a brain net. And what they're really saying is that, well, to the listener, you'll understand that as the hive mind. Now, if people think this is somehow sci-fi or conspiracy theory, they're absolutely wrong, and they're way behind this, because this is here now. It's been done. It's been done in experiments, and it's been proven to work. And this is the technology. This is the first phase of technology that's going to come after the kind of AI goggles, the kind of Google virtual world stuff. After that is coming this stuff, and this is going to come in a lot sooner than you think. And quite frankly, it terrifies me.
Graham, I'll just interject there. As I read that particular slide, my mind goes to the people who would be there in a laboratory taking animals and carving them up in order to experiment in this way. I find this absolutely obscene, and I think that the human beings that are involved in this, these are very, very dangerous people.
They are very dangerous. And I in the first lecture I gave, and I actually quoted UK professors, I think at least one we're going to mention in a second, and one of them wrote a book on it, and he actually put forward the idea that what we should do, we should experiment on people that want to commit suicide. In other words, we should do experiments that probably end up in their death, but the data we could get would be really, really useful for us, because we could move forward with our sort of transhumanist agenda. And, and to a sane human being that has any sense of morality or soul or feeling, that is absolutely horrifying. But this is the kind of mentality that you're dealing with. And really, it's a very sociopathic mentality with this really low or very little empathy for human beings. And they see us as an old model. They see us that they have to progress further from us, that we're nothing. We're kind of like the 1.0. They want to go on to the 2.0 and the 3.0 model. And quite frankly, I think they're insane, some of them.
So this one is The Guardian. Elon Musk wants to connect brains to computers with a new company. So is he talking about human brains now, or is he still working with rats?
No, his company is the business side of those experiments you saw. The mesh technology is the technology that he's developing, that he's talking about bringing out as a product for us, for you and me to use. Now, okay, putting aside the craziness of that and putting aside the fact, well, we might go, well, we don't want to use that. The reality is this: when you look at their models for this, their models don't allow you not to use this. You are going to have to move with this, quote unquote. Not least because you will not be able to keep up with the artificial intelligence itself, and it will price you out of the market. And his reaction is the Hegelian dialect, where he says, look, if we don't do this, we aren't going to be able to keep up with AI, and AI will dominate us and eventually will eradicate us. And this is not, a wild thing he's saying. It's just a very, very established thought that if we don't keep up with this stuff, it will eradicate us. And you've only got to look to history, you've only got to look to science, you've only got to look to nature. If you introduce a species which is more advanced, then the lower species eventually is subjugated and got rid of. And this is a very big worry in academic circles about this. And not everybody's on board with this AI kind of technology. But unfortunately, the leaders and the movers and shakers in this are being funded at the highest level and through governments, and this is a very, very big worry because it doesn't appear to be any common sense break on it.
So let's look at one of the scientific reports, and this is from 2015, building an organic computing device with multiple interconnected brains. It says brain nets, i.e. networks formed by multiple animal brains cooperating and exchanging information in real time through direct brain-to-brain interfaces, could provide the core for a new type of computing device, an organic computer. Here we describe the first experimental demonstrations of such a brain net built by interconnecting 4 adult brain rats. We've talked about the coverage of this, but what they're saying there, a brain net, multiple animal brains, but what we're developing is an organic computer. At what point do they feel that animal brains are not sufficient for this and they need to look at some quote-unquote higher form of brain matter?
Well, this is it. Really, this is the work that's leading on to that. And as I've said, the decision's already been made. It's already done. And, and you've got Musk now, who's, with billions involved in these companies, setting this technology up to bring it so that your kids can be plugged in. And the models they talk about is that you are connected as an organic computer. I mean, this is one of the most quote unquote conspiratory theories that's been around for many, 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 many years, decades. But the reality is we're now facing the reality of that. It is no longer a conspiracy. The science is done. They're rolling out the commercial aspect to this, and they're developing this. And you will see this. And this is the next step on from the virtual reality goggles. And this is why it terrifies me. And this is why I'm trying to wake people up, to use that horrible hackneyed phrase, is that people still feel this is many, many, many years away, 50 years away, 60 years away. One aspect of AI is that this aspect is very, very close. And they're not going to stop with this. And the nature of this, once it becomes commercial or money's made from it, they're not going to stop from this. And of course, if you understand the bigger picture of where this sits, you understand why this is being pushed and how dangerous this technology can be. There are aspects of AI that's very good, but only when it's capped. And at the moment, there's no cap. They're just going to keep pushing forward with this.
And so who's Andy Adamatsky?
This is a British professor. And I think he's at University of West of England. I'm not can't remember which university that is. It might be Birmingham or something like that. I mean, the quote there, if you read that quote, Mike, is terrifying. I read it out at AV8 and people just gasped.
Okay, so it says personal computing will become intrapersonal computing and intracellular. Each human neuron will be hijacked by a self-growing, self-repairing molecular network. Computers will be networks of polymer filaments growing inside and together with a human. Seeds of that network will be injected into embryos in the first month of their development. They will form a gigantic network inside the brain. Computers will be inside us. They will span all living creatures in a united computing network.
That is an immensely unpleasant couple of sentences there, Mike. Somebody in our chat room has said, and yes, what they're doing to animals, they're also doing to human beings in secret. The moment you see mention of doing stuff with embryos, is he talking about the future? Not in my opinion. Somebody somewhere's doing it.
Yeah. What are your thoughts?
Well, what he's described. See, look, you've got to read what these are published papers. This isn't in a book written by an author that someone would say is off his head. This is published literature. This is what shocked me when I started to speak in these circles, is that people didn't realize this stuff is actually going on, to kind of echo what you said. And it's dangerous because of that. And I don't want my kids plugged into this stuff. And I certainly hope that anyone who's got a rational or two brain cells working, they wouldn't want their kids plugged into this stuff. I went through in great detail even what the virtual reality does to the brain. You're shutting down and changing the very function of the brain, not just the function, the physiology of the brain, but actually changing the structure of the brain when you use this technology. And the more you use it, the least you're going to be able to come back into the normal three-dimensional world and behave normally in a three-dimensional world. It changes the way that your brain works. And it's almost as if we're releasing this artificial intelligence from out of this electronic world into the real world, and they're putting the human consciousness from the wonderful, beautiful three-dimensional world that we should be living in into this horrible electronic ghetto, quite frankly. And prison, it really what it will be almost like a digital prison. There are aspects that we can use, but where they're heading with it is not a good place.
And you are stressing there, Graham, that people who are allowing their children to use this sort of technology, and you see very, very young children with phones clamped to their ears, but you're now talking about this 3D stuff. Parents who allow their children to use this are actually allowing those children to be damaged, their brains to be damaged by what they're playing with.
Absolutely. You should not let your kid on anything under the age of 2 years of age, because damage done to the brain then can be irreversible. There's no doubt on that. And really and truthfully, they shouldn't be on this stuff under the age of 12, and you must limit it. Certainly do not let them go on these virtual reality goggles, because they absolutely damage the brain. Okay,
Well, Graham, look, I'll tell you now that they are getting onto these virtual reality goggles in schools. It's being pushed onto them late primary school, early secondary school is the level they're at the moment. I'm not sure whether it's happening any younger, but they are absolutely getting virtual reality through the schools already.
Absolutely, and you see this, and thank God some parents are going and complaining about this, because what they're doing now is have just normal computers. Reading a book and reading is not just about looking at something on a screen. And when you just look at something on a screen and don't read it and actually touch the paper, actually your comprehension goes down because the brain doesn't just work visually. They've done experiments on that. So if you let your kids go to school and just read from a computer, your kids aren't going to be as bright and as intelligent. That's point one. That's without all the damage from the Wi-Fi. That's a whole other program, just talking about the Wi-Fi. But these goggles, these virtual reality goggles, they damage the mind. Okay, they create a depersonalization, derealization disorder. It is known in the literature. Okay, and if you get that DVD, I show you all the science references to back that up. So if they're using that in school, you need to get that DVD, look at it, and you need to note down those references. You need to walk into school, you need to say, you're damaging my kid, you need to stop this.
Look, Graham, we'll just end on this one. The Beyond Humanism conference, which took place in Rome in July this year. The conference organisers encouraged submissions from a range of disciplines such as philosophy, sociology, literary studies, cultural studies, critical theory, media studies, bioethics, medical ethics, anthropology, religious studies, disability studies, gender studies, queer studies, critical animal studies, environmental studies, and visual arts. Is there anything they've left out there?
Well, I mean, ultimately, what they actually lead out, what they're going to leave out, is they're going to leave humans out. Because if you look at the title, it's beyond humanism. It's beyond the human. You know, transhuman is somewhat an old term, really, because they're going past us. They don't want us. They want to move beyond us. And so when people say, well, artificial intelligence isn't that bad, we can work with it to a certain degree, but the leaders and the movers and the shakers don't agree with you. They are saying, no, we need to leave humans behind. And I think there's a quote at the bottom of that slide there. Excuse me, if you could read it, Mike, just right under what you read. Excuse me.
Sorry.
Under the transhumanist one.
Yeah,
we're having trouble with our AI here. It's coming up.
Okay, I can read it for you.
No, it says what is also worth noting is formation of new cultures and societies which consist of non-human subjects mingling with humans or forming their own separate and previously unseen worlds.
I mean, how terrifying is that?
Yeah.
These are the people that are being funded at the highest level, and this is where they want the new society to go. And there's a whole lot more that's linking into this. Obviously, we don't have time to get in, and it is very, very sobering to think about.
Well, Graham, you'll be pleased to know then that Saudi Arabia has given a robot citizenship yesterday, I believe it was. That's around the various mainstream media today. So we've now got our first robotic citizen of a nation state. Where can it go from there?
Well, the good news is, of course, that robot hasn't got any facts, because if he got access to the facts, he'd probably be treated as a terrorist and unplugged.
Yes.
We'll end there, gentlemen. Mark and Graham, thank you very much for joining us. We'll say UK Column's objective here is not to frighten people. It is to make people aware of what is being pushed through the system, usually hidden in plain sight. If we're to stop this despicable stuff, we need to be aware of it. And remember the golden rule that action conquers fear. Don't sit there doing nothing. Speak to other people, warn, push out the information, because that is the way of overturning this.
And take inspiration from the Fresh Start Foundation.
Take inspiration from Fresh Start. What an amazing initiative that is. I think it's going to be copied south of the border. I have reason to believe that's going to happen, but I can tell you the Scottish authorities absolutely terrified. Ordinary people now starting to take matters into their own hands in a very measured way. Lastly, I'm going to say thank you very much to everyone who has donated to UK Column or taken out subscriptions. Thank you for that. We can only do it with your help. And also a big thank you from Justin Walker of the British Constitution Group for those people who committed to a monthly payment, because this has helped all sorts of things happen in the background. More announcements on that in the next couple of weeks. Thanks for joining us. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.